but Sarah is a nautical archaeologist at the Maritime Museum. And Curtis, did you want me to start that over again? We're good. Okay. So I'm going to ask you, Sarah, to maybe just start off by telling students a little bit about your job as a nautical archaeologist at Lake Champlain Maritime Museum.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, I've been there for about 13 years. People often ask, so how did you get started in underwater archaeology? And I usually begin by saying, well, I've always been really interested in terrestrial archaeology. I was like an Egypt nut. Like I made a paper mache sarcophagus, that kind of thing, like total geek. So I went to Boston University to study terrestrial archaeology, and I got an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's BA in that. And then I got a job as what they call a shovel bum, which is a contract archaeologist, where you, in advance of, say, a parking garage or a condominium, you go out and survey this land and make sure there's nothing really culturally significant there before they bulldoze it. It's kind of sad, actually. But what you do is wander around with a shovel and a screen and look for artifacts and document what's there, and basically sign off on projects like that. That was really fun. I loved it. But a buddy of mine suggested that I try scuba diving. So I took the class. It's about a 40-hour class with dives to get certified and all of that. And I got hooked. I was so into it. I really enjoyed the diving part. I love learning new things. And this same buddy suggested that I go volunteer for the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, who was doing projects on Lake Champlain, which were really good for beginning divers. So I was a brand new diver. So, relatively shallow, not really complicated diving. And I did about a week, 1 or 2 weeks of volunteering for them on this underwater archaeology project. It was a survey project where you have a metal detector underwater and you're fanning it over the bottom, and when you hear a little beep in the metal detector, you mark the point and keep going, and then someone else comes behind and basically excavates what's under there. Great for new divers. Anyway, so I did that, and I just got hooked. The next summer, they asked me to come back for an internship, and then the next summer, they started paying me, and I've been there for more than a dozen years. So that's how I got started. And it's been, my job has evolved as I've learned new things and added new skills, but it's also sort of what interests me. Working at a nonprofit museum, you don't make a ton of money, but you get a lot of access to interesting projects. So I talk to the public every day. I work in schools, everything from kindergartners up through elder hostel. I do programs. I scuba dive under the water and look at the shipwrecks and record them. I write the reports afterwards. I go to the library and read about, do the research on them. So a little bit of everything is involved in that, which is great because I'm a little bit ADD that way. I like to have lots of different projects all the time.
Okay, does someone want to ask a question? Start off? What's a typical day like in your job?
Well, there is no typical day. Like I was saying, I get to do a little bit of everything. If I'm doing a project and we're going out and looking at a shipwreck, so that's a very discrete project. We do work on Lake Champlain, in the Hudson River, outside of Syracuse and Onondaga. So if we're doing a field project, we get up really early, have breakfast. I really gotta eat good breakfast if you're scuba diving. Your body burns a lot of calories keeping warm in cold water. And pack up the gear, and it's a team activity, packing gear. We have a lot of buddy checks that we do, making sure that your equipment is working, your buddy's equipment is working. Hey, your mask strap's not quite right, let me fix that for you. It's absolutely critical that you have good, what they call buddy contact for that. We talk about what we're gonna do underwater. Not only are we bringing the gear to keep us alive, but we also bring gear to do our archaeology documentation underwater. So do I have clipboards? I brought all this stuff, by the way, so I'm going to pull it out when it's like relevant to the story. Making sure all of the documentation equipment is ready, prepped, that your pencil has an eraser and all of those things. Believe it or not, if you do a dive to 80 feet and your pencil doesn't have an eraser, you might as well just come on back up because you can't complete your task underwater. It's not like you can just run to the desk and grab one. You really have to think about everything in advance. We bring gauges down there to keep track of our time and make sure that our we're taking into account sort of decompression sickness and all the other things that happen to your body underwater. And do our job. Hopefully we get a lot of good information on a dive, come back up, we talk about it, we talk all the time. Hey, what do you think about this? My background comes from terrestrial archaeology. My colleagues, many of them come from, they have master's degrees in underwater archaeology, so it's a very specific focus. A couple of them went to school at Texas A&M University, which is a really good school for underwater archaeology. So, I'm always bouncing ideas off them. You typically do anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 dives a day, depending on how deep you are going and how long you stay. And you pack it all up and go eat. Do a lot of eating. And then we have to transcribe all of our notes, because I can tell you the scribbles that I make underwater with 3-fingered mitts, like wearing mittens underwater basically, no one else will read. I can't read them 2 days later, so you have to immediately transcribe them and take all those notes and make it into something that can go into a file for later. So that's one type of day. Then we have, you name it, all the other stuff I was talking about, in the library, doing research, talking with colleagues to see what their background research is, if that can help with a project. Great question. What else? Yeah?
What is the most challenging part of your job?
Oh gosh. Well, there's the physical challenges of staying alive underwater. So that's hopefully something that's we're really well trained for, and we don't hit those limits. But that is a physical challenge. Sometimes it can be challenging physically if you're getting all this gear on and it's 95 degrees outside. You may be diving in water that's 38 degrees, so you're basically wearing a snowmobile suit. But to get from land to water, you have to put it all on and get in those. So you can have sort of the heat exhaustion can be a problem. Cold exhaustion is a problem. When you dive in 38-degree water, you get cold. Here's a fun factoid for you. You get cold. Water conducts heat 25 times faster than air. So you get cold much, much faster than you do in air. It just sucks the heat right out of you. So that can be challenging. Sometimes it's just figuring out what you're looking at. Sometimes we encounter shipwrecks that are new to us. They're a new discovery. Sometimes it's not like discovering the Titanic, where it's like, oh, I know, I want to swim inside. I know exactly what it is, and there's a chandelier. Sometimes it's like, what's that jumble of timbers? Trying to piece it together. Sometimes it takes multiple dives and multiple people to look at it to know that that's the front of the boat, that's the back of the boat. That jumbled mess there might have been a cabin where people were living. So sort of piecing all that together can be really hard. But once you get it, it's really rewarding too. Yeah.
Do you have like a most notable dive, or like a ship that was like really important, or just a day that was really important to you?
Gosh, that's a really interesting question. There's so many different types of dives. One dive that my colleagues have done, I have to preface this by saying it's a technical dive that I'm not trained to do, is a really deep water dive. We were talking about it earlier, called the Spitfire. It's a Revolutionary War gunboat that sank in 1776. I've seen video of that dive, so that's pretty exciting. For me personally, I've done some diving in Onondaga Lake, which is kind of interesting. It's an interesting part of the world. This is out near Syracuse. And the diving itself was not particularly challenging. We were in shallow water. I was warm and comfortable. It was summer. But all of a sudden, I feel this like bam against my chest. I was like, what is that? It was a carp. This big, I'm not exaggerating. And it scared the bejesus out of me. I'm sure I scared the bejesus out of it too, because it's just like zero visibility. You can't see what you're doing. And they're swimming around doing their thing. So that kind of, there was no real danger, but it kind of panicked me. So that was sort of interesting. What else? One really interesting dive on Lake Champlain, which is actually open to the public, so anyone can dive it with a standard certification, is the Sloop Island Canal boat. It's in about 80 feet of water. It's in perfect preservation, perfect. I mean, it looks like it went down yesterday. And because it's in 80 feet of water, it's not yet covered in zebra mussels, which are these, are you familiar with zebra mussels? These are aquatic invasive species. They just cover everything in relatively shallow water, but this one doesn't have that because it's deep. And that's one of my favorite dives because you can almost forget that you're underwater, you know, except that it's pitch black. But. Should I get out some stuff? Should we like play with some toys? Keep talking, keep asking me questions, but I want to show you some of the stuff I use, some of the gear. Going underwater, step one, you need air, or a blend of gases, but preferably one that involves at least 21% oxygen. I brought a very small tank. This is called a pony bottle. It's like a redundant air supply. Usually you have a tank, you've seen them, right? 80 cubic cylinder, it's about this tall, and it fits in here. I didn't want to schlep that because we're not really breathing off of it. But this has all of the characteristics of the big bottle. It's just small. This would actually be attached to the side, so you'd have your big tank and your small tank at the same time. Both have these valves on it, so you have 100% redundant system. 2 tanks, 2 regulators that come to you, so if one runs out or has a problem with it, you can switch over. Okay, so step 1 is air. And step 2, the problem with air underwater is that it becomes the pressure of the surrounding environment. So when you're in deep water, you're under a lot of pressure. The parts of your body that are made out of water, not a problem. Water is water, so the pressure on it does not damage it. The problem is air being compressed as it goes down underwater, right? So imagine a balloon at the surface. If you take that balloon to 33 feet, it will shrink to about half its size. Another 33 feet, and it goes to, this is fresh water, goes to half that size again, and so on and so on. So parts of your body that have air spaces, that's a problem. Your lungs can breathe and inhale and exhale, so we can account for that. If you hold your breath, well, let me back up. So when we're breathing air underwater, we have regulators that get it from the tank, which is really high pressure. You can't breathe off that. That's about 3,000 pounds of pressure. To give you scale, your tires are about, what, 15 pounds of pressure? So this is really, really highly compressed air. You ever hear a tire pop? It's really loud. Okay, so this tank is too high of a pressure to breathe off of, so I have to convert it with this regulator. This first stage gets it to ambient pressure, and then this second stage gets it to a pressure that I can inhale, right? I'm not going to be able to breathe off 3,000 pounds. I'll lose it. You can hear the air fill all the hoses. And all you're doing is inhaling off the regulator like that. Okay, so we have air. Good. How much air do we have? We need to know that at all times, right? So we bring an air gauge. This is measured, again, in pounds per square inch. You were asking if the tank was full. What are we reading?
3,000.
Just about 3,000. That for this tank is full. I also have a depth gauge. We're at 0 feet of, that's comforting to know that we're at 0 feet right now. And so this is an analog gauge. They also make computers that do all of this for you also. So I have a computer somewhere in this mess here, which is great because it's another redundancy to keep us safe. Lake Champlain is dark. I mean, once you get below 70 feet, you have to have lights all the time. And so navigating your way around can be a problem, so we bring a compass. Not only bring it, but learn how to use it, which is the key, and pay attention to it. So if we're heading in one direction, we pay attention so that we can take a reciprocal course on the way back. The knife is not for stabbing wildlife. It's to make sure you're not in any entanglements. If you get fishing line or something like that, you're going to take that out of there. Hello. Welcome. Awesome. We're talking about scuba gear and how it keeps us alive underwater. To carry all this stuff around, that's what this is. It straps to your back. These hoses come around so that you can have your regulator come around to your face, right here, right? It straps on like a backpack. clothing, what do I wear?
Wetsuit?
Wetsuit? Definitely. Have you guys seen wetsuits? They're, you know, lots of sports use them, right? It's made out of neoprene, which is a crushed neoprene, which is little tiny air bubbles. So when you go underwater, it compresses. It works well, but I'm kind of a wimp. I don't like to be cold. And wetsuits allow a small amount of water to touch your skin, and your body heats that water up. And the idea is that it's tight enough so that there's not water flow all the time. The other option is, if it's not wet, it's dry suit. I brought that too. A dry suit is a big bag of air. You're basically just wearing a giant rubber suit. There's different kinds. This is the one that I use. This one, so it's got feet, obviously. You want to have access to your hands, so they have a rubber seal to keep the water from coming up into your arms. And different, do I bring my gloves? There's so much here. I bring my gloves. Yes, I did. Yep. These keep the water off your hands, right? And they just zip seal on, and you can cinch them down. When you are completely encapsulated in all this, you've got a hood, you've got a neck seal, which does the same thing as the, you want to pass it around? Same thing as the neck seal does the same as the wrist seal. When it's working properly, it keeps the water away from your body. This keeps, your body is only heating up the air next to it. And of course, like we said, water transmits heat how much faster? 25 times faster. Not just 25%, but 25 times faster than air. So if I am heating up air inside the suit, I'm going to be warmer because it's not sucking as much heat away from me. Does that make sense? The problem is, I'm wearing a giant bag of air. How many of you have tried to put like a, what do you call it? Like a dodgeball or a beach ball. You ever try to put it underwater?
It floats.
It floats like a lot. And we're talking, that's a little tiny ball like this. Now try and put this much air sealed up underwater. How do we do it?
Weight it down.
Weight it down. There's so much weight. So step one, let me put this back here before I forget. Step one is a weight belt, which I didn't bring because I just got sick of schlepping gear. It's just a belt that you put lead weights on, and you can take off or add on weight depending on what you need. I wear about, with my full suit, including my undergarments, I wear about 22 pounds of weight on my waist. That's in addition to the weight of all the gear. So I wear this just like a snowmobile suit, basically, underneath, and keeps me warm in here. But of course, the more layers you add, the more weight you have to add to put it all underwater. So that can be a problem. Here, I'll put this up here. We can vary our weight, I should say vary our buoyancy by using a BCD, buoyancy compensating device. That's this thing here. Imagine if I have a ton of air in my suit and a ton of weight on my waist, and I sink down, wouldn't I like to someday come back up again? So this gives you an option. It's a bladder here of air that goes all the way around that then I can add or subtract. There's an oral inflation here, and I can also hook up one of these hoses and inflate it that way. So I can do this underwater. Add air, subtract air, add air, subtract air, and really get myself to exactly the buoyancy level that I'm comfortable with. And that changes. The deeper you go, the more all this stuff compresses and the faster you sink. So you have to keep track of it all the time. Remember that balloon of air at the surface? When it shrinks down and you add air back into it, it expands. Now if you have something at 33 feet and I bring it back to the surface, what size is it going to be at the surface? Twice as big. Exactly, twice as big. So that's why we need to have access to this air to let it out when we do that. Same thing with the suit. There's a port on the front of this suit that lets me add or subtract air right here. Add air there and subtract air here so that I don't become the Gumby man at the surface. What else? Questions? I've been talking for a long time. Somebody throw something at me.
Do you research all of the ships? Like, is it your job to research all the ships?
Yeah, definitely. Sometimes we research first and then dive on them, and sometimes we dive on them and then go read about them, and usually it's a back and forth. So read a little bit, dive a little bit, get a little more information, go back, and I didn't notice that detail underwater, and I wonder what that's all about. Construction type might be new to me or something like that, so then I go back and research it again. Everything from how the boat is put together to what types of artifacts may have been found on it to maybe who owned it or why is it there in the first place. Was it a storm? Was it just thrown away? Lots of different reasons for vessels to be at the bottom. What else?
What's the deepest you've ever been on that?
I'm trained to go to about 130 feet. That's what they call recreational dive limits. So that's as far as I've gone. If you want to go deeper, you can get additional training, what they call technical diving. Training either to go deeper and breathe on air, or more appropriately to go deeper and learn how additional gases are blended together. So right now, the air that we're breathing right now is about, 21% oxygen, give or take. The rest of it is other stuff, mostly nitrogen and then some trace other things. So that works great. Our bodies are built for that. When we go underwater, that can cause some problems because when it's under greater pressure, we're inhaling greater parts per million. You learn all of this in your scuba diving training, but suffice it to say, you learn how your body reacts to compressed air, and then you also learn in the technical diving how to overcome some of those limitations that your body has underwater by adding other gases, like increasing the percentage of oxygen. So instead of 21%, you might have 36%, or adding in other gases altogether to reduce some of the physical limitations we have underwater. More gear? I have lots more gear. Yeah.
So what percentage of your time is spent underwater, right? So as an archaeologist, if you're interested in archaeology, you think like, oh, I'd love to dig, or I'd love to discover underwater, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So what percentage of your time is spent doing that? And when you come across an artifact like a cannonball,
Mm-hmm.
what exactly, can you just bring it right up? Do you have
Excellent questions. Yeah. So let me talk about the cannonball stuff first. If you come across an artifact underwater on Lake Champlain, I'm going to specify here and I'll tell you why in a second. If you find an artifact underwater on the bottom of Lake Champlain, it belongs to the people of Vermont or New York or Quebec, depending on where you are underwater. That's fine. You can still look at it, but you can't bring it up and you can't damage it in any way. That's true for a cannonball. It's true if you find a shipwreck. Because it belongs to everyone, it does not belong to any one person. So that's the rule. You can't mess with it and you can't bring it up, but you can look at it. They're all open and free to access. So all of these shipwrecks you can dive on anytime you want. In terms of how much time I spend on actually underwater, I'd say, that day I was describing where we start early and prepare and then we dive and then we talk about it and then we dive. I'd say you probably get in 2 to 3 hours of diving in a day, and all the rest of it is preparatory, either physical stuff, logistics, gear, clipboards, all that stuff, or dealing with it afterwards, recopying your notes. You might work really intensely on a project like that, doing 2 or 3 dives a day for a week or 2 weeks, and then you spend months afterwards recopying notes, doing the research, writing the reports, revising the reports, doing the historical background. So it's actually a relatively small proportion of time underwater versus all the other stuff that supports that work. For the work that I do, because I do lots of different things. Some people just crank out the stuff underwater and that's all they do. They don't necessarily do the other parts of it.
How does being underwater, like throughout the years and stuff, affect your body?
Yeah. We were talking earlier before the whole group arrived about the strains on your body from intense, what they call saturation diving, where you're, not the kind of diving I do, but that technical level where you're underwater and your body is fully saturated by, in this case, nitrogen, not water. They don't care if you're saturated with water. But if you're fully saturated with nitrogen, it's really hard on your joints, on your body, to do that kind of work all the time. I think underwater archaeologists aren't necessarily, that was in reference to like underwater welders who just go down and weld all day long. Because we're up and out of the water a lot and doing other pieces of it, I think it's less physically demanding on our bodies. There are limits. I mean, carrying all this gear around, you have to have a certain amount of physical dexterity to lift and move, which is not to say that people with physical limitations can't scuba dive. There's all kinds of awesome equipment that is adaptive for that. But it's certainly a physical sport at some level, whether you're doing it for fun or whether you're doing it for work. So yeah, it puts a strain on your body for sure. Yeah. But the best thing is when you're underwater, you're weightless. You're totally weightless. So gravity might be a bummer for some people on Earth, like on land, but take that away underwater. It is not a barrier for people underwater. So I think, I've met people that are like in heaven underwater because they're not fighting against gravity. Do you know what I mean? So that's one of the interesting physical limitations of it. That's removed underwater instead of added. What else?
How does what you thought you were going to do when you were in high school or college compare to what you're doing now?
Well, I had no idea I would be doing the underwater stuff. I really thought I'd be working in Egypt, but that didn't work out for me. I thought I would be like, looking at King Tut's tomb and stuff like that, which a lot of archaeologists do. I mean, it's fascinating, and there's interesting sites all over the world. That's the whole point of archaeology, is so you can use it as a way to travel. One friend of mine travels she's just recently kind of settled down, but until very recently she used underwater archaeology to travel all over the world. She's been in India, doing diving in India, diving in all these crazy places. So there's almost no limitations. In terms of what I really thought I would be doing, I tried, and I mean this sincerely, I tried really hard not to put too much focus on it. And that might seem backwards, but I really wanted to open options when they came to me. Do you know what I mean? Some people are just so focused and driven, they know what they want and they know how to get there. I wasn't one of those people. I'm not one of those people. I'm almost like a sponge where, oh, squirrel, but really like taking advantage of whatever opportunity is in front of me and, embracing it, even though it might not have occurred to me back when I was planning things out. Yeah.
So do you get, like your friend who went to India, do you get to travel around the world with the museum, or did they kind of just want you to Europe?
We're a little bit more regionalized. We do travel around the region, so we do projects all around the Northeast. Some of my colleagues have done projects in the Azores, for example, in Portugal. I did not go on that job. But so it has to be a fairly, because we're so specialized on Lake Champlain and sort of the Northeast United States, that tends to be where our contract work is. That actually brings me to a good point. So archaeology can go lots of different ways. Some people study it and get advanced degrees. They might get a master's or a PhD, and then they go and they research in a particular area. They become regional specialists in Egypt or India or wherever. And then they teach about that, so they become professors in universities. That's one track. Another track is the museum world. I described that. It's lots of different things. So everything from dealing with the public to working with young children and so forth. And then there's another track, which is contract archaeology, where I mentioned preparing land in advance of condominium building, for example. That's a type of contract archaeology. There are similar veins underwater. So here's a good example. They're putting in all kinds of pipelines under Lake Champlain for electricity, and there was one proposed for gas and so forth. Those pipelines impact the bottom, and so it's part of the permitting process that they have to make sure that A, it's okay for environmental reasons to dig a trench at the bottom of Lake Champlain and put a pipe in it, but also that they're not going to negatively impact any of the what they call submerged cultural resources, shipwrecks, and other stuff that's underwater. So they hire people, contract archaeologists, we happen to be one of them in our region, to go in and make sure that there's nothing, that they're not going to impact anything negatively. We do a lot of work in Syracuse. One of the veins, one of the niches the museum has found ourselves in is contract archaeology in Superfund sites. Are you familiar with what a Superfund site is? It's something that the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, has designated as highly contaminated. It is the most contaminated level that they, criteria that they have. And when they're cleaning it up, they have to take into account whatever shipwrecks are down there as well. So you need a nautical archaeologist that is skilled in the area, knows the vessel types, and also is trained to work in toxic waste dumps. So that's one of the things I do. Actually, I'll show you.
What are, like, and you said when you went to India and stuff, like, what are the dangers of going underwater, like animals and toxic waste?
Yeah, there's tons of things in each region, right? Every region's different. So if you're diving in Lake Champlain, there are no sharks. We don't have stinging, jellyfish in Lake Champlain. So we actually have it pretty easy. The downside in Lake Champlain is it's really cold and really dark. So that's a pretty challenging environment to work in. If you're working in the sunny Keys of Florida, you might also have stinging, things that sting you, things that bite you, creatures that, barracuda and things like that. So you just have to really understand the local flora and fauna and take it into account. In general, the wildlife is not going to mess with you unless you mess with it first. They would rather just leave you alone.
How is the equipment for freshwater versus like saltwater different?
It's a great question. The gear itself, the basic parts of it, you need a suit, you need a BC, that inflation device, you need a tank with air. Those things are the same. What you might change is how much weight you need, because you are more buoyant in salt water than you are in fresh water. So you add more weight if you're diving in salt water. And you might also, it's really a temperature thing. If you're diving in the Keys, you're not going to wear a snowmobile suit underwater. It's 80-degree water, you'd overheat. So you really have to accommodate for that. If you're diving in the Red Sea, which is really, really, really salty, add a lot more weight. This is a type of mask. So you're familiar with a standard mask, right? And standard mask, maybe a snorkel. Snorkel's not so good for scuba diving, but on the surface you might want to conserve your air. So that's your standard gear there. When I'm diving in really contaminated areas, the Superfund sites, we don't want our skin to touch the water, right? That's the whole idea, is that if it's contaminated, we want to protect ourselves. So we wear full face masks. My suit, that rubber hood comes around like this, and this mask seats on top of it, so none of my skin is touching. My gloves I showed you have, they don't let water in. The entire suit is a solid, so nothing can touch my skin. It's a little bit, there's all these decontamination procedures you have to do afterwards, But anyway, it's just one type of diving I do. I don't have to do this every time, and not every underwater archaeologist. In fact, I dare say a small percentage of underwater archaeologists are trained to do what they call HAZWOPER diving. So HAZWOPER stands for Hazardous Waste Operations and Emergency Response. So anyway, it's a special, it's an additional certification beyond what our regular training is. I'm such a blabbermouth. What do you guys want to know about?
What kind of training do you have to do to be like a diver?
Yeah. So the basic certification, there's a bunch of different agencies that you can go through. NAUI, PADI, there's several others. It's about 40 hours of sort of classwork, and then you do, and diving. So you first learn in a pool, or if you happen to be in a really calm environment, you can learn in the ocean, for example, if it's warm and calm. Like that's the key. It has to be controlled water source, right? But you learn to dive in really controlled environments with a really small number of people with an instructor. And once you can demonstrate that you can do all the skills, everything from take your mask off underwater, not freak out, and then put it back on again. That's the key, not freak out. You know, just that you're comfortable troubleshooting with things underwater. Then you get a certification card, and you're certified to dive. And a lot of people say that card you get is almost like a learner's permit. So it's not telling you that you're the best diver ever, it's telling you that you know enough to continue to learn without killing yourself. So that's the basic training. I got trained in outside of Albany, New York, but there are certification training places all over. One that I work with all the time is up in Burlington. So that would probably be the closest for you guys if you were interested in doing that. So you take the class, everything from they do like evening classes to like a weekend intensive or something like that. There's lots of different options based on schedules. And some people get trained on vacation. They go someplace warm and sunny and learn it all on vacation.
And you have to be 14, is that right?
12.
12.
Some certifying agencies will do it as young as 10, but the dive shop that we work with feels that 12 and up is the right number.
And then you could go down and look at some of these preservation sites.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so a lot of the sites we dive on just aren't publicly, you know, we don't post the locations of them, but 9 of them on Lake Champlain are state parks underwater. They're marked every summer with a big buoy, so you can tie up your boat or take a charter, go down. There's a travel line right to the wreck, and you can dive the wreck. They're all in that sort of recreational dive limits. They're shallower than 130 feet. Most of them are much shallower. They're awesome. They're a great way to get into scuba diving. It's just something really intense to look at in a controlled environment.
Are you allowed to like actually go into the ship?
No, well, there's nothing. These sites they're posted, and some of the ways to get into them are blocked. Mostly for the protection of the wreck and you. If you go into this wreck, it's really easy to become disoriented, and what they call an overhead environment is one of the things that's like a big no-no. Don't get somewhere where there's something over your head that blocks your access to the surface. And the other thing is it can damage the shipwreck. If you get stuck in there and you're thrashing around, the bubbles that you exhale can damage some of the fragile timbers and things. So the short answer is no. Sometimes we do when we're studying them, but really it's a case-by-case basis based on the comfort of the archaeologist as well.
So how do you preserve the ships? Like, and like the 80-foot one is like preserved completely.
Yeah.
But is that like your guys is doing? Or?
That's Mother Nature, man. That's just the environment. Some shipwrecks, not on like, well, one way to preserve a shipwreck is to pull it out and treat it with chemicals. It's effective and extraordinarily expensive. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to pull. We have over 300 shipwrecks on Lake Champlain. Tons. You're not going to pull them all out. Each one would cost millions and millions of dollars to preserve. And where would you put it? And how are you going to manage it and build a facility and blah, blah, blah. So opening access, learning, studying about them, recording them as much as possible, that's where our head is. Like, try and preserve the information, even if the actual objects can't all be preserved forever and ever. That's why it's so important to study these things before additional aquatic invasive species come. So I talked about the zebra mussel. Zebra mussels, they're a little tiny mussel, and they colonize anything that's down there, including rocks and shipwrecks. So all the decks now of shallow shipwrecks are totally covered with zebra mussels. The next thing that's coming is the quagga mussel, very similar in size and shape to a zebra mussel, but they like deep water. So all these shipwrecks that are in 80 feet or deeper are going to be covered with quagga mussels soon, just like all of the Great Lakes shipwrecks are totally covered. They don't eat the wood, but they obliterate all the detail. So I didn't bring my slideshow for you guys, but I encourage you to go on the Maritime Museum's website. We have tons of photographs of shipwrecks as well that you can wander through and see sort of before and after the colonization, what happens to the shipwrecks, and how, you know, we're trying. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no preventative measure to keep these zebra mussels out of the lake. They're here for good, forever, and they're very comfortable here.
How much, if you probably own your own gear, so how much is it to get your own gear?
Well, you don't have to buy it all at once. All dive shops will rent gear. I usually recommend, I'm also a dive master, so I help people learn how to scuba dive. So I can't teach you by myself, but I can help an instructor. So what I usually recommend is that you start by buying a mask, your fins, and your snorkel, and that you own that. Because it's just something that if it fits you properly, it makes your dive fabulous. If it doesn't fit properly, it's all you're gonna think about. That's relatively inexpensive. You can pick up a mask for, I don't know, 50, 60 bucks. You can rent them as well. Snorkels are much less than that. From there, I don't actually own my own tanks. I rent them, or I use the Maritime Museum's tanks generally. This equipment, this is another good thing, the BC, to rent as you're getting started. The regulators, that's probably the next big piece of equipment you'd want to invest in because it's so important. Those, I don't know what they go for. I could find out for you. But again, you don't have to invest in all of this all at once. You can sort of ease into it. A lot of divers will loan gear or sell you used gear for a lot less than if you were to buy it for retail. So it is possible to get into it without spending a ton of money. Your suit is something else you can rent.
Anybody have any other questions?
How are we doing on time? What's the time? 11:35. Okay.
Any other questions?
What else is down there besides ships, or is it like only ships?
Lake Champlain is a wonderful ecological environment. So we have tons of freshwater fish. We have bass. You often see bass. They're sort of like nesting sites, so they can be a little bit aggressive if you get up in close to their nest. We have muskellunge. We have trout. There's just so many different freshwater fish in Lake Champlain. We also have, sunfish, all these small fish as well. What's it called? The eel, the lamprey eel. You ever read about those? We're talking about invasive species. They may or may not be invasive, but anyway, they're prolific. They're an eel that swims underwater and has a big sucker mouth, and it will suck onto fish and burrow out their flesh and eat them. Just goes back to your what creepy crawlies live underwater. They don't actually hurt you because you're totally encapsulated in some sort of rubber, right? But some of my friends, I haven't ever seen them underwater, but some of my friends have, and they like to stick them to each other's tanks. They suction their face onto the tank.
What's the oddest thing you've discovered while?
The oddest, oh gosh. I don't know. There's so much stuff under there. There's stuff that people leave behind that's really old, and then there's stuff that's really new, like shopping carts, cars. There's a couple of airplanes at the bottom of Lake Champlain, small biplanes. So that's pretty odd.
Have you ever found a skeleton?
No, knock on wood. This is one of the good things about being an underwater archaeologist is if your ship is sinking, you're usually going to jump off of it. So although you may perish in your shipwreck, you may not be in the vessel itself. So there are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, we don't find a lot of human remains on shipwrecks.
And if you do, what are you supposed to do?
Immediate timeout, right? So if you find human remains, you stop everything. You call the state, and they guide the process from there. There's all kinds of additional permitting and things that need to happen. Not to mention, it's just respect for a gravesite, you know, just human respect. So, let's hope I don't. That's not why I got into archaeology. I like the stuff we leave behind.
Well, there are a lot of artifacts at the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum to check out if you haven't been there before.
Yeah, we're open May to mid-October for the general public, but Rachel has my contact information, so feel free to reach out anytime. I love talking about this stuff. And we also have a lot of opportunities. We were chatting earlier about internships, volunteerism. We do summer camps for all different ages. You guys are all in a great age bracket. We have tons of awesome stuff for you guys. Everything from underwater archaeology camp to blacksmithing to boat building, stuff like that. So there's lots of ways to kind of continue the dialogue at whatever level you're interested in. So I hope is this truly a career path, or just you're like want more information to make good, you know what I mean? Like, is anybody actually thinking about it for real for a career? Yeah? No? Cool. Well, I can tell you that it's really rewarding. It's not a moneymaker. You have to be interested in the subject and feel rewarded by that and not by the money part of it. And it, yeah, it's challenging just like any job, but it's interesting. So, not all jobs you can say that about.
Let's give Sarah a round of applause.
Thank you for having me.
And Sarah, I can help you pack up some of your stuff, but I'm just going to ask students if you could fill out